Now let's go into a new chapter. This is actually my favorite chapter, and let's kind of get into the details. How does technology play into the new mental health paradigm? I've been in the tech domain for many years. I basically believe that technology can solve a lot of things. But what truly inspires me is that technology has to offer in building communities, can address loneliness, and especially the pandemic now, and allowing us to truly share innovative solutions in the form of AI and digital therapeutics. So to explore this world, the whole new world, let's start with a panel. And these are dear friends. So let's talk about conscious investment in startups with three amazing entrepreneurs and investors. I've just really gotten to know them well now. Nait Jones, he's a partner in the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. Solome Tibebu, a digital health investor and behavior health tech strategist. She's passionate about frontier technologies. And David Kumaran, my brother Kumaran, who's a coach, entrepreneur, yogi, startup exec, motorcycle rider. Let's welcome them to the Never Alone Summit. Hey, how are you guys doing?
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us.
Lots of love. Okay, this is going to be, I'm really looking forward to this panel. We have 25 minutes and we're going to get to know some really interesting topics. I don't think anybody's shared these topics in the past. So my first question, when you all are looking at investments, when you're looking at conscious startups, what is the criteria? What do you define as a conscious startup, and how do you kind of go about that? I'll go ladies first, actually, here. Solome.
What's really exciting for me, and certainly something I can relate to a lot, is what is the founder's personal connection to the topic at hand? Oftentimes, they really do have the answers within to serve the populations that they're looking to reach. Now more than ever, we've got mental health startups, for example, that are focused on specific conditions or specific populations. And it's just it's a different atmosphere. It's a different outcome when really that founder has a personal connection. So that's pretty important to me.
Nate, David, thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things I look for really in founders is that, you talked about practice and sadhana in the previous conversation. And so I look at, how do they currently define profit? How do they define what they're trying to do? And if they're looking at, obviously, the conventional model and they're looking at it from that perspective, I look for the conscious elements of how is it not just about them, their team, something bigger, what they're impacting. So for me, when I invest in conscious founders, I look for that. And I think the sadhana piece is really important because if you look at if they have some sort of practice within themselves, and then they're able to kind of help their team and be contagious and be infectious and be the light for their team, as well as the community they're trying to impact. So for me, I look for the sadhana piece is very important, some sort of practice, and what are their definition of profit and how are they redefining it for the new world?
Beautiful. Nate.
Yes, thank you for having me. And I've spent quite a bit of time advising mental health startups over the last 3 years. Obviously, when the pandemic began, that really picked up. We put together some communities on WhatsApp with founders of mental health companies to see how we could all band together to help the onslaught, the second pandemic that was everyone being locked in their homes for 6 to 9 months suddenly. What I look for when I'm speaking to founders that I've advised is a connection to the work. What I mean by that is, a genuine, empathetic connection to what's being built. Many of the founders I've spoken to have a family member that's dealing with a mental health issue or are mentally ill and have to go through a treatment process. And because they've been intimately involved in that, they've gleaned certain understandings of where there are holes and gaps in the current treatment options available. And I see a lot of empathy coming into the space, especially in the last 5 years, which is amazing to see because I don't think we've fully understood the complete picture to how treatment should happen for mentally ill people, where it should happen, when it should happen, and startups are now thinking about that. It's a great time for it as well. As corporate spending on mental health has gone through the roof because it has become a corporate productivity issue now. And so now companies are now seeing that their employees need to be supported in several ways. And so it's an incredible time for new innovation in the space. And I welcome all the smart and connected and really, really earnest founders that are going after the space.
This is music to my ears. I just begin to think, is this the 1% conversation I'm having? Are really people like you around? Because so much of the Valley, so much of investment is about ROI, returns, likes, views. I mean, we have a society today which is not about Tinder. It's all about Tinder, but not about tender, not about kindness. I mean, David talked about we need new metrics. Is it time for us to redefine success? And what would that look like in this whole new world, where it's not just about views and posts and comments, but it's not about like, but who is like you, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Was that one for me?
Anybody? I'm going to go for it.
Okay,
Nate.
we're going to
go
pick
for
on
it,
you
Nate.
again.
Go for it, Nate.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, like I said before, there are different companies that are going after different parts of this space, and I love it. I love that kids now, teens now, understand that they need to balance out their time. And, even the big companies, the big device manufacturers are putting limits in place, not only for parents, but kids, and that the numbers show that it's not the parents that are enforcing this. The kids are doing it themselves because they have a fundamental understanding now of what screen time is doing. And so they're beginning to manage that. And what I'm very hopeful about, and I have 2 teenage daughters myself, is that the culture is beginning to change around likes and views and all of these things, and the understanding of how harmful and toxic some of the culture around that and the race to become an influencer and popular. The upsides of it are great, obviously. I support influencers and creators in my business, in what I do. And I think it's wonderful when you can express and connect with your audience and build your audience. But the other side of that, while teens are developing and young adults are developing, we're seeing that. But the culture is beginning to shift, like I said, to where people are now having an understanding of there needs to be balance. And I love startups that are entering the space to help kids manage that, to give them other things to do to connect to human beings in a way that isn't solely based upon my own self-image, but more about what I can bring to the whole and how I can collaborate, which is much healthier and much more community-based. Beautiful.
Solome, you work with youth. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I love that so much, Nate. And the only thing I'd follow up with that is the pace of technology and social media has evolved so quickly that we really do need new measure sets to be able to measure not just clinical mental health improvements, but really youth and adult digital well-being. So there are some interesting organizations who are doing quite a bit of work in this space. For example, Second Muse's Headstream Impact Navigator tool has developed criteria to be able to measure the digital well-being of youth. And so that integrates everything from social media, ed tech solutions, social tech solutions, to be able to assess what they're doing to youth and young adults' mental health and well-being.
David, any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about, software is kind of eating the world, quote, some A16 knowledge there, right? And if you think about capitalism needs a software update as well, right? So what are the new metrics that we measure versus looking at short term, which is, quarter over quarter profits, looking at the long-term investment of what we're building, right? So understanding what are the impacts that it's having on you, the founder, the builders, to your communities, your teams, your city, then ultimately the globe, right? So for me, I think understanding the definition of profit and really bringing some conscious elements to it, where it's not just about quarter over quarter profits. We are looking at the long term, right? And I'm really excited with technology, with cryptocurrency. I think there's the sky's the limit, and with blockchain, you have the ability now to look at certain aspects of things and tokenize it, right? And be able to say, this is the metrics, this is the way we measure it, and it's a tangible way of actually moving forward. So I think there's a lot of exciting possibilities, especially with that blockchain space coming into place, where we can redefine profit, bring consciousness into capitalism in a very meaningful way.
I want to start with you on this one because you changed your life. You became a yogi. You practiced your sadhana. So you know what, in life, you have a financial, you get a credit report, your car has a dashboard, but in the dashboard called life, there's none. So you kind of go into this internal dashboard, internal awareness. Share your thoughts, and how can entrepreneurs not look at startups as a sprint, but it's a marathon, it's about resilience. So share your thoughts. I'd love to hear all you three people with your backgrounds. What's your thoughts on awareness, resilience, and building resilient startups?
It's a great question. I think, one of the things is in our current system, everything is about speed. Mm-hmm. So you'll notice, right? Speed up, 5 to 7 year returns. How do we actually go faster and faster? And I think the new notion of slowing down and looking at what's happening within your own system and checking in, right? And bringing that as part of the equation of as you're building companies, right? As you're building technology. Looking at your technology that you're building, who is it serving, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this notion of building very fast has been the theme since the industrial age. And now it's really looking at balancing that and bringing down, like slowing down to your point about the marathon. Mm-hmm. You're going to be building a long-term business here. What are the things that it's going to be impacting? How are you, what are you doing with your team? What kind of culture do you have within your company? Ultimately, that culture and that team is going to impact everybody else, the markets, and therefore the world. So I think slowing down is really important. For me, my personal journey, that was pretty much it, right? Like I've built multiple companies and I've really followed that mantra of like building fast. There's lots of sayings, fail fast in Silicon Valley, right? Push to fail. And I think those are great innovation parameters, but at the same time, there's this powerful notion of slowing down, listening, looking at what your actions are impacting, and really building for the long term.
Beautiful. Solome?
Yeah, I would like to add to that, we can talk here as funders and investors and what can we do to support innovators and entrepreneurs in their mental health and well-being and helping them develop as conscious leaders. But one thing I found that's really important in my own journey as an entrepreneur is having those peer relationships for, it's important to have all sorts of relationships like mentors, investors, perhaps employees. It's a different relationship all around. But one thing that's in terms of the importance of mental health and well-being is having those peer entrepreneurs with similar backgrounds who are going through the same things. That to me has made a huge difference, and I think it does for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Nait, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I spend time with founders, coaching and mentoring, and I would say a good portion of my time is spent on the psychology, the ups and downs of running a company. High stress situation where decisions have to be made with limited to almost no data. And, as a CEO, you get the blame. Many times the founders I'm working with, they have families and they've decided to take on this extremely stressful lifestyle, a lot of risk. They're doing it for the upside. They're doing it for the future of their family and to build the dream that they've always wanted to build, to bring what they're bringing into the world. But the cost is high. It's a high cost to build these companies. And so something that I've built into even programmatically into what I do is we sit with our founders and we say, okay, what's today? Is the mountain on top of you or are you on top of the mountain? Mm-hmm. What's going on today? And there's this release that happens and they have to be, they always have to show that they are competent and smart and strong all the time. And you give that space and you create that space. You say, okay, in this space, you don't have to be any of those things. You just be how you are and you feel how you are. And it's okay to express and release. And you'd be amazed at the sharing that happens in these kinds of spaces. And you can apply that broadly, actually, outside of startups to everyone. We walk around and we carry all of these different things inside of us. And, society, we feel a pressure from society to appear competent and happy and all of these things. And because of that, we push, so many of us push the parts that we should be addressing to the side in order to keep playing that role every single day. And so creating intentional spaces is a very critical practice for myself, and then offering that also to others in my life. And I don't separate the people. So I don't say you're the CEO right now, and then when you get off of work, you're the dad, and then there's this other portion, this other 2 hours, you're the motorcycle enthusiast. Right. You're all of those things at the same time. And we have to be aware of that when we're dealing with the human beings that are building these companies, because if they're healthy, they're going to build healthy cultures. And those healthy cultures are going to be great places to work. And people are going to create space for other people because that happened for them. And so it's just an integral part of my practice.
I think you bring up a very interesting point. It's called psychological safety. If I'm not right, it was Google's Project Aristotle, which they said the whole thing about what happened at home, check it at the workplace door. A lot of things has changed. Your workplace is now the house is your workplace, everything is kind of coming together. And it says no separation, so psychological safety has a whole new meaning.
Yeah, it's important.
So I want to ask you all, maybe if you want to share 3 things for people listening to you all globally. And we had Spotlight India and really talking about, I was so inspired this morning. In the country I grew up in, and we are talking about the new paradigm of mental health, looking at psychedelics, looking at the new shifts. And I was like, wow, this is really powerful. Give me 3 points you would like. I know Solome said, mentors, it takes a tribe. Give me 3 people or 3 things which have influenced you, or 3 things you want to share to prospective startups.
I can start. So I think for me, if it's really about awareness, so that's the first step. It's like understanding. Without awareness, really, you don't have a measure of where you are, what's really happening within your body, within your system, within your team, within your company. So I think the first step is really cultivating awareness. So having that in place. The second thing is, I think reinstilling that awareness with a sadhana or a practice of some sort, whether it's meditation, whether it's Tai Chi, whether it's Qigong, whatever it is that you do for your practice that grounds you and also puts you into that awareness at a deeper level to maintain that. And the third thing is Sangha, supporting. So community around all of that, right? So as you have your awareness, you cultivated your practice, you want to surround yourself with people that empower and help you groom that new identity that you've built. What I've always found with founders in general startups is that they're constantly going through an identity crisis because they're evolving and growing so fast that they don't have congruency with their identity. So having that community piece really brings that identity of who you are, that better person that's 1% better every day, to that complete wholeness within that person. So I think awareness, sadhana, practice, and Sangha community are my 3.
I want to ask you a question before we move on. You talked about community. Today, when we can't hang out together, and it's so distributed, what are your thoughts on community? And then I'm going to go back with the same question. David, to you.
Yeah. I think what's naturally COVID has kind of taught us is that everything is back to the village way of living. Mm-hmm. So if you look at micro communities is a new thing, right? So everybody has their own micro community that they're building in technology. But if you look at from experiential living in your life, you probably have a really good relationship with the people that are in the closest proximity to you since COVID, right? So this is how we used to live as villagers, right? As hunter and gatherers, hyper local, right? And so I think it's going back to that. And if you're looking at what's going on, I mean, all the trends in all the communities that we're building, even the Never Alone Summit, right? We are a micro community amongst all of mental health. So I think that's the opportunity and the beauty of where we are post-COVID.
Beautiful. Solome?
So besides different types of relationships in one's network, mentors, peers, or mentees, the other thing I really want to point out is while it's pretty obvious and rudimentary that the idea of regular wellness and routine around wellness, I can't emphasize enough how, especially for mental health innovators who combined with probably managing some kind of lived experience while, as Nate outlined, a really stressful job, it is really important to take care of those things. And just a personal story, So I struggled a lot with anxiety and OCD as a teenager. And ultimately, I tried maybe 4 different therapists, 4 different medications until I finally found the right combination to be able to manage it. And then after that, it was kind of like, oh, wow, I overcame this. I'm going to go and give TED Talks and talk to different groups about it. And, I've crossed the threshold. And then after a while, the routine started going by the wayside. I was missing out on sleep and diet and exercise. And it just really created the perfect storm for all of my symptoms to come back in full force. And so while these are things that we hear about every day, all the time, it is really important. And for me, that's when I realized, okay, this isn't something I just overcame. This is something I'll be managing for, a long time. And as a result, it's become a top priority for me.
Thank you so much for sharing, because talked about anxiety. Anxiety is a precursor. People talk about depression. Anxiety is more pervasive. I've had my own share, and I know a lot of people. I'm mental hygiene. I have it. When I went through an anxiety challenge, I called up my good friend, Dr. Srini Pillai, psychiatrist at Harvard, and he gave me a technique. He called it circa, chunking, break it down, because if you have too much of stress going into the amygdala, then your prefrontal cortex doesn't process, so chunk it. Ignore mental chatter. And R is for reality check, control check. Do you have any control over this? And the last one is attention shift. So really give me the tools, and this is so important as we look into tools for mental health. Nait, your thoughts?
Yeah, so the 3 things that the framework that I give people to think about is space, place, and grace. And so I tell people, always give yourself space and create that space. Always have an intentional place that you can go to and give grace to yourself and others. And so the space can be anything. It can be 2 or 3 trusted business advisors who you've deputized to say, hey, sometimes I don't want to talk about business. I just want to talk about my life. Is that okay? And I want to be able to talk about what I'm dealing with, right? So that you can have that pressure release valve. It could be a community online. But finding that space where you can actually express, because what I've learned is that with a lot of the people that I've worked with as founders, there's a whole lot of mental chatter that you talked about, but it never comes out. And until you actually speak it out of your mouth, this is how I feel, this is what I'm thinking, and until you say it to somebody else, you can't disempower it. And so I encourage them to say what it is that's going through your mind, and then we can disempower those notions, those assumptions that are so harmful or that are driving you to these behaviors that are not healthy, right? And then place. Is there an intentional place? Is there a park you can go to? Do you have a meditation area in your home? An actual intentional place where you can go to, where when you go there, it sets you, it grounds you, right? And then grace. Remembering that you're never as cool as you think you are on your best day, and you're never as dumb or idiotic as you think you are on your worst day. So you've got to give yourself that grace, and then you have to give others that grace. And that's the framework that I tell a lot of the founders to go through is space, place, and grace.
Beautiful. Space, place, and grace. So we have 3 minutes, and I wanted to end it with each of you all sharing 1 minute and your message for the world. Mental health, technology. If there's one thing you want to share today, let's each take a minute and then share with the world.
Okay, I'll take that. I think it's very important now more than ever. I think since we went through COVID, the big reset, that we take the lessons of COVID and what it showed us. We were forced to go inward. We were forced to look at ourselves a little bit, and our lives got a lot quieter. And I think going back to our noisy lives that we had before COVID is probably not the recipe for success. And so what did we learn from this big reset? What lessons are we going to take from this big reset as we reapproach our lives and the busyness of a schedule and travel again, birthdays and weddings and business meetings, as we re-implement all of these things back into our lives? What are the things that we've learned in the last year that we should continue to practice? We should remember that, and don't just go running back to the way it was before, but make sure that we maintain balance.
Thank you. Solome?
I can go.
Yeah. Thanks. For those who are listening, a lot of the conditions we're talking about are absolutely manageable. They're treatable, they're manageable. And I know for me, I felt very unique in the symptoms I was experiencing. I had a lot of shame and embarrassment, but the reality is they're so much more common than we think, and they are treatable. And so I do hope that this conversation and this entire summit can inspire anyone who's on the fence to go seek out support, to please reach out to that professional and get the help that you need. And for those innovators who are developing unique solutions to expand access, stigma, unfortunately, is still such a huge piece of our world and creates a barrier for individuals to get the care they need. And so it's, as an employer, for example, it's not just about putting out a solution for your employees and their mental health. They have to see leadership talking about how this is a culture of mental health and wellness at your workplace. Everyone from peers to managers to leaders, we need to have more conversations because stigma should not be a barrier for people to get mental health help.
Thank you.
And I think, what Nate, to echo on what Nate said, is really important. We're in a post-COVID world, right? The possibilities are endless. Ultimately, what you can design and craft yourself to be, it's completely up to you at this point, because what you pretty much know, and the world knows, what doesn't work, right? And 2020 has made that very, very clear for us. So looking at yourself from a completely fresh perspective, re-innovating yourself, looking at what are the things that you're truly passionate about. Where are you currently in your mental health? Is it that you need to talk to somebody? Do you need to reach out to somebody? Do you need to look at friends and people that you didn't talk to before 2020, and then you're reaching out to them now? So whatever the situation may be, the opportunity of the world resetting is an opportunity for you to look at your life and reset that. And something I always keep in mind personally daily is that I'm a finite piece of life, right? So understanding that we're not here long. And if you keep that in perspective, all of a sudden, when you put death up, everything else kind of falls to the side way, right? So it's important to remember how beautiful life is. We're here for a brief moment, and look at all the things that you can do to improve yourself, your family, your community, and the world. And it all starts with you.
Beautiful. So I'm going to basically probably end with one question, and this is a question I wanted to ask the three of you all, and it's my personal question on AI and ethics. I'm fascinated after I saw the movie Her, right? I said, I can look at micro expressions and people can say, how am I feeling, right? And then I can look at my voice and tone and vagal tone and figure out, am I stressed? Am I anxious? I can look at electrodermal activity and figure out, am I stressed? I can look at gait. I can look at my position, lat long. There's so much information. Now here comes the question. AI, privacy. The more data I have, the better I could be. I want to ask your thoughts as we move into this world of mental health, where there's so much information, data is being gathered. The data is going to help us. What do you think is your perspective on privacy, ethics, and is there a new governance required for AI and mental health to come together in the whole new world?
That's a really good question. Interesting idea with a whole new governance. I mean, personally, I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space. Now, as you outlined, Poonacha, the idea that we can gather so much interesting data through tools like AI to be able to build a better picture around an individual's mental health. Likewise, the ability to scale mental health support services through AI and chatbots and whatnot. I don't believe we'll be able to address our provider shortage anytime soon. But at the same time, to your point, I do think that we have quite a bit of ways to go in terms of addressing ethics, privacy, and as it has been in the news in the last however many years, we need more people who represent diverse populations to be developing these kinds of technologies. You've seen some of the use cases where the mistakes that are happening in AI when that's not the case. And so I certainly hope that's one change that happens as we move forward.
Yeah, I think with micro expressions, a lot of things have also gone wrong, and people have been targeted. So I think it's really important for us to have that. Have you seen, Solome, have you seen any good use cases from your perspective of actually being done right? Before I move on?
At this point, there are a few different chatbots and technologies that have had quite a bit of experience in the consumer market that they're now partnering with large employers and payers and to further scale their technology. So there's movement happening in the space for sure.
Perfect. Thank you. David and Nate?
Yeah, I touched on it earlier, but, and Solome just kind of touched on it as well, which is there's an incredible amount of momentum around solving some of this from the employer standpoint. And because of that, that will make things easier. But there still will be an incredible wall culturally around the adoption because of the trust issues that are at an individual level, which I think is a much bigger kind of barrier to scale than is the regulatory barriers. And until those things, which are more of cultural things, cultural attitudes towards technology and towards like, what am I telling, where is this data going to live? And like, can this be subpoenaed later on? Or like all of these murky things that people have assumptions about. Those are kind of some of the biggest cultural barriers around this. I helped a company called Crisis Text Line for the last few years, kind of advising them and helping their founders and, kind of think through what they're doing as well. And they deploy at scale thousands of crisis counselors that are readily available online. People like you and I go through their MOOC course and then get certified. And then you're on the phone with people that are in crisis. And behind the scenes, there's a tremendous amount of information those crisis counselors get access to. I believe, I don't know what the company's doing now, so I'm not a representative of the company. Please don't hold me to this, but that they're getting a tremendous amount of information to help them scale across so many different cases, because they serve a lot of people every single day. They take a huge volume of crisis texts every single day that end up saving lives, tons of lives. And it's going for it to scale. And you brought up a very good point. These tools have to exist because we just can't serve the population that needs to be served unless they do. And so I'm interested to see how this evolves. I think this next generation may be more open to it, but I do think we have some cultural headwinds.
Great. David, any closing comments before we end?
Yeah, I think if you think about what are the next generation looking for, right? So if you look at authenticity, you look at transparency, sustainability, these are currency for the next generations, right? So when you think about data, you have to think about data from the perspective of all those three things. Currently, if you look at data, there's a huge monetization component to it, right? So what is the trust factor that the consumer or people lose is that we don't know what's happening with our data. So there's a lack of transparency. There's a lot of lack of authenticity of how their data is currently being used. And is it even used in a sustainable manner? We don't know, right? So if you bring those three elements and look at data and look at how that's actually going to move into AI and look at those algorithms, there's a tremendous amount of technologies and innovation, especially in the blockchain space, that naturally give you transparency, right? Gives you that from the day one, so consumers know as far as what is it that's happening with their data, right? Good example is if you look at companies like Patagonia, you're able to look at the complete supply chain of how your product is made, and you have a line of sight. So from the farmer to the sheep, all the way to the retail location, it's a beautiful way to build consumer confidence and that trust, I think. So they've done that in a good way.
Once again, so thank you, Nate, thank you, Solome, thank you, David. Really grateful
Thank you so much.
You guys raising the vibration and bringing consciousness to the world. Thank you.